Tell me this: if you were an American, do you think you'd own a gun?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably,
I fucking would.
probably,
There's no doubt
yeah.
I would. Yeah, it's because everyone else has one. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'd have one just because it's the status quo, and that's like that's cultural now. You know, like how do you address that?
It's like fashion over there,
Yeah,
man.
it's fucking cool. I want a Glock, man. It's gonna be fucking
Exactly.
pimping. Yeah. yeah. I can stand back, motherfucker. Yeah.
My topic this week is a little bit different, I guess. So I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, at the beginning of your topic, that we received our first hater this week.
That's right. Yep.
So and it was specifically on the video that you spoke about the alt-right, we discussed what the alt-right was, and I think we said a few things in that episode that were quite, I guess, sort of
Let's say derogatory
towards the alt-right. Yeah, we said they were like homophobic, we said that they were racist, we said things
sexist
like that.
and a lot. Yep.
Now, obviously, someone has managed to find their way onto that video by searching alt-right on YouTube. You know.
Who are they alt-right?
Yeah.
I guess.
This person's made a troll account, called it Adolf Hitler, and he's put a comment. Now, whoever it was commented on the video, which I removed, by the way. I reported it because obviously his account says Hitler, so I reported it and it got removed. But his comment said something along the lines of, 2 survivors of the Pulse nightclub shooting make a podcast.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even understand. So I had to go away and Google what that was. So anyway, it turns out that the Pulse nightclub shooting was like a massive terrorist attack in Orlando, Florida, where there was a guy who went into a gay nightclub and they shot the police up. And he killed I think it was like 49 people. So it was a massive terrorist attack. So really insensitive of this guy to say that, first
Super
of all.
bad. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I think the insult was that we're gay. I don't know. Because
you had to tell me what the Pulse Club was as well. I had no idea what it was. I kind of assumed that maybe the guy thought that we were just like soft leftists that were just hating on the right or something. I guess,
I think so, and I think the insult was that we're gay. I think he was literally, just a child being like, "You two are gay."
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
So first of all, this guy clearly still thinks that calling someone gay is an insult, which is hilarious in its own right.
Right.
But it got me thinking though. So thanks, Adolf, for your content. When I was researching what the Pulse nightclub was, it got me thinking about gun control. Now, obviously, that story comes from America, the Pulse nightclub shooting, where guns are legal and you can carry firearms and things like that. But guns in the UK are very much illegal. You can't carry them around. I think you might be able to have some for sport or something like that.
You can get permits for hunting.
Yeah. But it's not like you don't just walk around with like a firearm in your jacket or whatever. It's illegal here, and it has been for the whole time we've been alive. But in America, these are like perfectly legal to carry.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, which is a fairly ignorant in this topic, before I did the research, I was against gun ownership. For as long as I can remember, I've been totally against it. I hadn't looked into the subject at all. And you see all these like mass shootings that happen in America, and I was kind of like, guns should just be outlawed. There's so much death that you hear about. It should just be against the law, especially when you hear about school shootings, for example.
Yeah, and the frequency of them in America, places like that. Like,
how often you get these mass shootings? It just seemed perfectly obvious to me that guns should be outlawed and they should be illegal in every way. So that was my opinion. So this guy comments, or this girl comments on the video, and it got me thinking about it. And in America, there seems to be a lot of pro-gun movements as well as anti-gun movements,
Oh yeah, and huge government backing as well.
Yeah, and I've never thought about the reasons for owning a firearm. It's never occurred to me why people might think that. So I thought it would be interesting to go up and have a look at it.
Okay.
And I came across what I think is the specific real reason why specifically Americans think they should have the right to own arms this week when I was researching this. And that's basically the Second Amendment of the Constitution.
Yes, the militias, isn't it?
So, which came about following the American Revolution. Now, I've also been watching a show called Outlander recently with my mum, and they've actually covered the American Revolution a little bit.
Nice. Swat up for the episode.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fictional show, but it's had this sort of... It's had the American Revolution as a plot line going on. Mm-hmm. So basically, I think it was like the oppression of the government, and the people kind of rose up against them to try and fight against this tyrannical oppression that was going on, and that kind of started the American Revolution and made America what it is today. So when they did this, they drafted up the amendments, and the Second Amendment was a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I think in essence what that means is the government has guns, so people should have guns so that the government can't tyrannically oppress them. You know, it's the idea that people should be able to own these things because the government has them, and the people have no way to defend themselves if the government chooses to oppress them, if they don't have firearms. Now, I couldn't believe it. I honestly couldn't believe this was it. And I was like, that's like a great argument for
and you
the
never
ownership.
hear it. You never hear it, do you?
So I thought it was like a great argument. So, but what are your thoughts on gun control anyway? Before I start rambling on about these laws and what I think about it.
Right. Okay. So I actually knew that. I knew about that. The initial reason being that it's, you know, people always say that the Second Amendment is my right to bear arms, but they don't explain that the idea is that this was set up after, you know, the Americans revolted against the English, or the British, I suppose.
Yeah.
And they set up a new government, and they thought to themselves, like, there was an opportunity to build a new government from foundations, and they says that one day this government might fail. You know, and if it does fail, then we need to have a possibility for our citizens to save this for us, because the government itself, that'll be fractured or whatever. So the idea is that they will have the right to form a standing army that is not recognised by the government, with the intention of, like, basically revolting. You know, and it's like it's a very, see, when you describe it like that, to me it sounds like a very American founding father idea, doesn't it? It's like, because it is very fair and just and very, like, you will have that freedom type of thing, and so I think the idea makes a huge amount of sense. I don't necessarily think that those ideas apply to the modern day anymore.
They are a bit dated, yeah. So I think there's not been an update of this. I think it was like the 1780s that this happened.
Really?
So
Okay.
it was a long, long time ago. So yeah. I think first of all we have to address the fact that this happened, you know, 240 years ago or whatever it was.
Jesus, that's a long time. Yeah.
But it also got me thinking about, you know, I'm not saying that this has convinced me that people should have guns or anything like that, but it got me thinking about the fact that my opinion on gun control is very much founded on the history and the culture that my country has established, and that is that guns are not legal, and there has never been any reason for them. You know, you rarely hear about gun homicide, like in the UK, if at all.
Well, we had the one shooting, and then we changed our laws. You know,
I've never seen a gun. I don't think in real life. I've never actually seen someone that has a gun, you know, a pistol or a shotgun or anything like that. I've never seen any of those things. But the history and the culture of America is very different from that of the UK. And I think there has to be something said for the appreciation of that. And there definitely seems to be a strong support for these amendments. It's almost like people remember, you know, the revolution. It's almost like it's ingrained within them.
Well, see,
sort of
it's
thing.
not been that long for America since the founding of their country. You know, like, what, 5 generations or something like that? Like, approximately. I don't know if they live quite long. Like, that's not an incredibly long time. And the formation of America, it was like groundbreaking. You know, like, they took the country back and they made their own values they made their own laws according to their own values. And that, you can understand how people would have a strong connection to that and a strong wish to fight for that, right?
Yeah, a part of me also worries, though, that a lot of the people that do own guns and don't want to get rid of them don't actually know what the Second Amendment is for. So it makes me think that a lot of them sort of have their guns and they have their arms, and they're like, well, the Second Amendment says I can have this, and it's just them saying, can't take my guns away. You know,
Sure.
It's like people aren't actually, like, thinking about it. It's probably a large proportion of people who are kind of saying that. Now, when we think about all these, like, high profile gun crimes, though, these people that are committing these gun crimes, first of all, need to be seriously mentally ill, right? So, for example, if you and I if we had guns, I don't imagine that would be a problem in any way, shape, or form, because we wouldn't be shooting anyone. You know, if we had guns, we would be keeping them, they'd be in the house, or
in a fucking lockbox, you know.
yeah, something along those lines. So, how much of the negative backlash for guns is really about something else? Because people seem to be very against guns because of these shootings. But in reality, the issue to me seems like it might be mental health. It seems like the problem may be founded somewhere else, and guns are just a tool that they use to enact these problems. You know, these things going inside their heads. You know,
It's a good question, isn't it? Yeah, it's because like it makes a lot of sense, and I've heard that argument many times before. That the argument of this isn't to do with the guns we have. This is to do with the people that lack help, the people that lack support from their government in order to deal with these issues, and they end up going fucking loony. But like, I know you're comparing. I know I'm about to compare the UK to America, and you cannot do that because America is so much larger than the UK. But like, the UK, we had a similar problem like 30 years ago with knife crime, and like knife crime, particularly in London and Glasgow, was like really, really, really bad. There's like hundreds of fucking knife crimes happen every month, and people are dying because of it. And what our government did was they just fucking locked down on that. They made the charge for owning a knife super, super high. You're like, you want to fucking jail for it. And they just basically had like really, really hard reform over the course of 10 years. And now knife crime is just not a problem here. It's like it's still what we have instead of gun crime. It's not went away. But I kind of feel that things can be done about it, and it can't just be like, how much can you blame people that have problems with mental health on, and just say the government can't do anything about it? It's an easy out in a way. But I do agree with you. The thing is that when I'm talking about knives, it's not the same as a fucking assault rifle. Like, see, if someone walks into a school with a knife, they're going to do damage. If you walk in there with a fucking AK,
dozens of people are about to die.
Dozens of people are about to die. Yeah. I suppose now I've said that, a system in which there is little regulation on guns, and in which like it's just so deeply ingrained in their culture, it becomes like this huge, huge problem when you have poor systems in place for mental health.
So I've got a couple of statistics on the screen for you just now. So I'll just take a couple of like these countries in isolation so that you can see the sort of effects. So I'll look at the United States and I'll look at the UK. Mm-hmm. I've got the total number of homicides and suicides relating to guns across countries. Now, the countries at the top of the list are like Venezuela, El Salvador, Jamaica. So it seems like a lot of countries where I guess guns aren't regulated very well. There's probably a lot of like crime.
Is this like total
guns.
number of guns or guns per person we're talking
No,
about?
this is crime. This is the amount of homicides and suicides per 100,000 people in the country.
Oh, sure, right, okay.
So the countries that are at the top of the list have the most per 100,000 people.
Yeah, yeah. Those countries do sound like prime suspects for that.
Yeah. So for the United States, you have 12.21 people per 100,000 die, and I think it was in the year 2017 that happened. Now, it's interesting to note though that I think over half of that was suicide. If I'm reading this diagram right, it says that there were 4.46 homicides and 7.32 suicides. So a lot of the gun related deaths are actually suicide. There's a lot of suicide by firearm. Now, if I compare that to the UK, for example, if I go down to the UK, there's only 0.02 deaths that are homicides and 0.16 deaths that are suicides by guns every year.
Startling difference.
So it is a massive, massive difference in the amount of deaths. Now, those are obviously figures in isolation, and it's a bit anecdotal, but it gives you a sort of idea of the differences in these things. And I don't know how likely it is at this day and age. Like you said, those laws, the Second Amendment, surely is a little bit dated by now. So how likely is it that the government are really going to like tyrannically oppress the people? But it's also it seems like a very serious risk, because all the press that you see surrounding guns seems to be supremely negative, and justifiably so, because of these mass shootings, these school shootings, etc., which probably do give a lot of negative perception. But the alternative to that is like never really covered either, because it hasn't really happened since the American Revolution. You know, it's not really, it's not been a concern for 240 years at this point. People still seem to be clinging on to it. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, we said at the beginning that like it no longer applies to the modern age, and I think it's a little bit more than that. I think it completely and utterly fails in the modern age. I think the idea of allowing people to keep firearms to form a militia against their government does not work when the government has like, missile launchers on top of fucking vans and like, like
Tanks.
all the tanks, like the crazy military hardware that particularly America has, like military hardware that's just like almost difficult to describe, because it's so advanced. Like people they've got soldiers that can effectively turn invisible in the day, and like fucking stealth suits and heat sense and this and that. Like the concept of allowing people to buy a Glock so that they could throw down their government in case they think the government becomes tyrannical.
That's like, a little bit delusional now, isn't it?
Totally delusional. I just don't see how like. But I think you're right though. I don't think people that want their guns think they're doing that to prepare themselves to hide from the government. Do you not think that the vast majority of people in America want a gun? It's because everyone else in America has a gun. Like,
yeah, that's it's probably true. It's a good point. I mean, back in the 1780s, having a gun was probably one of the most powerful things you could have.
Right?
And it was
yeah.
one of the most powerful things the government, had as well. And I think there was a perfectly feasible solution to fighting against the government. But you're right. Fast forward 240 years, if you've got an AK-47, you're not going to get very far in terms of throwing down the government. If the government calls in the army, like that militia will be quashed very quickly
in an afternoon.
Yeah. So I guess we're talking about something that we're kind of coming to the conclusion that it doesn't really apply anymore. It's a bit dated.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about how dated it is, what do we think should be changed? Because obviously that's up to the individual country that does it. Britain's got totally outlawed.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're thinking about specifically America now. What should be changed about gun laws, do we think?
So this kind of comes back...
If anything, I mean.
Well, yeah, that's right. So this is what I was actually going to come on to after your very first question about how I feel about gun laws. Is because it's, whenever there's a new shooting in America, people in the UK end up talking about guns for the next couple of days, and like just talking about scorning the Americans. It's fucking ridiculous what they do over there. Why don't they just like type of restrictions and that type of thing? And I've always held the same opinion that there is nothing that can be done about guns in America. See, if you were to stop gun production tomorrow, which you will not do because the NRA backs the government with billions of pounds every year. Like, America has an investment in the continued production of guns. If you were to stop producing them tomorrow, there would still be 10 guns for every American on American soil. Like, you can't do anything about that, like, the government can try and... What are they going to do,
Yeah, so apparently there are 120 guns per 100 people in America. So there are literally, more guns than there are people in America. So you're right. The first thing we have to think about, is there anything that can be done? Because if you tell people that they can no longer buy guns,
mm-hmm.
they take up arms at that point, right?
Right.
That potentially starts another revolution. And surely you can't stop the production of guns. You can't say that people can't buy guns, because then you have a lot of the population that do already have guns, and it's like, well, I can't get one even though my neighbour's got one. So you can't really say that.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to stop people from buying guns, you have to take everyone's guns away. Now, that seems like a non-starter. Can you imagine how many citizens and how many police and how many of the army are going to die in that scenario?
Yeah, exactly.
Where someone literally posts up inside their house.
If they tried to forcefully do it, that would be mental. That would never ever happen. And you're right. Even if like the governments didn't try to forcefully do it, and they just said like, we'll give you $1,000 for every gun you hand in here. As soon as they stopped selling guns, there would be a massive lucrative black market on guns in America. It's because people would still want guns, like it's because like, tell me this: if you were an American, do you think you'd own a gun?
Yeah.
Yeah, I fucking would.
Probably,
There's no doubt
yeah.
I would. Yeah, it's because everyone else has one. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'd have one just because it's the status quo, and that's like that's cultural now. You know, like how do you address that?
It's like fashion over there,
Yeah,
man.
it's fucking cool. I want a Glock, man. It's fucking
Exactly.
pimping. Yeah. yeah. I can stand back, motherfucker. yeah. Oh yeah, definitely get myself killed with that gun. But I'd want one. You know, I'd have one.
Because if they do take away their guns or they try to take away their guns, and it is the Second Amendment that you have the right to own arms, trying to change that amendment seems impossible in a country like America where they're so proud, sometimes for no good reason, proud of the country that they live in, and it's like it's an inherent value that they almost have. They're like, we have the right to own guns. You can't take these guns away. I can't imagine any scenario in which they regulate those anymore. You know, there's so many guns in production, so many people that won't be willing to give them up. I can't imagine any scenario in which that's realistic, that people take away their guns.
No.
So if we still think changes should be made and we think we can't take them away from people, we're talking about regulation at that point. You know,
Right.
You can still buy guns, but maybe the way in which you receive guns is maybe tightened up a little bit.
Right.
So we then think about stricter gun laws. Now, I researched that a little bit as well, and people start saying things like, "Oh, this is a violation of privacy." So I thought about that a little bit more, and I thought about the kind of people that you wouldn't want to have a gun. And two people spring to mind immediately. I think about people that are mentally ill, people that have mental health issues, and criminals.
And kids.
Kids, I guess, yes. Can kids buy guns in America? God, I fucking don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe a topic for another day.
Yeah. You'll never guess what we found out last week. America's a lot more fucking crazy than we thought.
So yeah, I think kids goes without saying. We don't think kids should have guns.
Okay,
but we're talking about the mentally ill
and
criminals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, people say it's a violation of privacy to go into someone's background like that. But
oh, really?
If a militia was to gather to try and overthrow the government,
right?
Even then, why the fuck would you want someone that was mentally ill
you wouldn't want him on the militia, right?
To have a gun, you know,
right.
if you got, say, like there's a guy in your neighborhood that's well known, he's like crazy. He's
mental. better unhinged.
You know, you're trying to form a militia. You know, do you want Crazy Steve?
Yeah.
To have a gun? You know what I mean? At that point,
oh right,
sure it is his right to have a gun, but if he's not in the right frame of mind, or if they're not like mentally stable and they have a gun, they can fly off the handle at any minute. That could be really dangerous for your militia as well, you know. So it seems like a bad thing anyway.
So do you think there are Americans which argue against that type of legislation? Like that?
I think there are Americans that say you should be able to buy a gun no matter what.
That's fucking crazy, man.
That seems mental to me. So first of all, the fact that you've got people with mental health that are trying to join your militia, I think it's probably a bad idea for your militia to have people that are mentally unstable having a gun. And then you think about criminals as well, when they say it's a sort of invasion of privacy. Now, to even be a criminal in the first place, you have to have infringed on somebody else's rights anyway, right? That's what being a criminal is. It's like breaking the law. And the laws are in place because people have rights. You know, when you think about the crimes you can commit: murder, thievery, assault. You know, basically every crime infringes on someone's rights in some way, shape, or form. So if you're a criminal and you're infringing on someone's rights, and that takes you to jail, and you get out of jail or whatever, you've foregone someone else's rights. So why should you then have the right to do something else? Like that right should be taken away, right? Yeah. You can't have a gun anymore because you can't be trusted, because you don't respect other people's rights.
Right. Yeah, and you've done it once, and there's nothing to stop us thinking you'll do it again. You know, like I know that the jail system's supposed to reform people, but particularly in America, it's well known that if you go in jail, there's a good chance you're going to be back in jail. You know, and American criminals are the type that are likely to reoffend. They should obviously be the ones that are not given fucking firearms, so at least when they go back to jail, it's not for shooting someone this time, right?
Yeah, well, that was my thought process anyway. So that there seems to be an argument for keeping them, for not even having any checks. That seems like the most obvious thing to me, to put in more regulation, but I wonder if Congress kind of fights back on that kind of thing.
Well, that was actually the point I thought we were going to be leading to. Is because I think that, see, when we're talking about awareness of guns, you know, like the dangers and like the, you know, the idea of giving it to a criminal, in America, like, guns are their culture now, you know, and I mean that in like a big way. It's like closely intertwined with how they live their lives, and it's not only like the fact that everyone has a gun and they can buy a gun. So much of their government is propped up by the sales of weapons and armory and guns. Like, it's a huge part of how America makes money. Also, America are like the superpower of the military superpower of the world, and that's been like a you know, a half a century to 1 century old strategic plan they've been doing. They want to have this show of force in order to maintain the bravado of being America. You know, like, this is trying to like take away their guns is like taking away their identity in a way. It's because like it's goes so much more beyond than just being a tool that fires the bullets. Like, in America, it just seems they've taken it to like the nth degree, where it's almost like guns are like a religion in some ways. It's because it's like blind faith in these things, and they don't know why they have them or why they want them, but you fucking can't take them, you know? That's
So we're kind of coming back to the fact that this is almost like dated in a way, because at the time guns were like the most prevalent warfare technology, if you know what I mean. And I think the Second Amendment was sort of set up so that the people would have the same sort of weaponry that the government would have, you know, so that they could kind of fight back against it.
makes sense.
But you're right. Nowadays we're talking, the government has like nukes. They have
yeah.
they have weapons that could kill millions upon millions of people on the push of a button. Now, the way the Second Amendment was drafted was kind of drafted to say that the people can have the same weaponry as the government can have. Now, I don't think that anyone in their reasonable mind would say that should be upheld to today's standards.
No,
because
please, no.
if you followed that through, you're then saying that people should be able to own nukes because the government has nukes. That's the next step. That's extrapolation for like guns.
Sure, yeah.
Surely nobody is advocating for that.
Also, see, to take it another way, which this rule breaks down in the modern era, is that these days the government, if they were trying to like turn against their country or whatever, or that the people try to rise up against the government wouldn't start shooting them with guns. They'd turn off the water. They'd turn off the internet. You know, like you wouldn't. There's no. It's not like us versus them. There is no battle here because you could not fight them. You know, so this whole concept of forming a militia, like it's hilarious now. Actually, when you try to think about how that would actually go down.
So we're kind of getting to the point where the weapons that are available these days, it's clear that they should not be readily available. So I think we are saying that there should be some form of like regulation. You know, there reasonably there's no way to overthrow a government these days, and we kind of have to put our faith in the fact that the government isn't trying to tyrannically oppress us, because I mean, we've got democracy, we've got voting and things like that.
But we have to have faith. You're right.
If the government was doing that, they wouldn't get voted in. You know, democracy
well
would hopefully be upheld. So we are drawing the line somewhere at weaponry being able to be owned by people. You know, you and I have come to that sort of consensus, that compromise, that there should be a line somewhere. Is that line before guns now, do we think?
So what are you proposing that guns should be banned and no longer sold to Americans?
I'm saying that we're saying that there is a line of the kind of weaponry that someone should have a right to own.
Right.
So is that line before guns? Should we be saying that people shouldn't actually have guns?
Okay. That's funny, actually. I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I think that a very reasonable line that we should probably all agree on is that automatic weapons, assault rifles, are definitely past the line. You know, we don't need, like, that's the type of thing where if you hand that to someone that, exactly like we said earlier, that is like mentally unstable, they will do serious damage. It's not like a pistol where it's like semi-automatic. You've got 8 rounds in the clip. You're talking about 40 bullets that just like spray out this fucking room. You know, like
Sounds like we're talking about Call of Duty here, man.
it's because we are. You know, this is the type of like these weapons, which just like the ability to like press a button and to just extinguish a life 100 yards in front of you, like. People do not fucking appreciate that. You know, they really don't. See in Britain, when like we see a gun, we'll be like, holy fuck, it's a gun. Like, see at the airport, guards cut around with guns. It's because like terrorist threats and stuff like that, and like you can see everyone staring at them. It's like, oh my god, that's the first gun I've ever seen in my life. Like, if I was to hold a gun, I would shit myself. I went clay pigeon shooting once, and like the whole time I was genuinely really, really, really nervous because I thought I was gonna like hurt myself with this fucking gun. You know, it seems like in America that they've totally lost that ability to realize how dangerous these bits of equipment are. Like people that argue that they should have a right for an automatic weapon, it's like where's the justification there that this like miniature weapon of destruction that could kill an entire village of people back when these laws were written, why do you think you need that these days? You know, and unless the argument is that I need this assault rifle in case someone else has an assault rifle.
Yeah, well, even when we think about automatic weaponry, that wasn't available in the 1780s.
Well, that's exactly. It was fucking flintlocks. It took like 2 minutes to load.
Yeah, you shot a bullet, you fucking cleaned it out, you put another bullet in, exactly. So we're talking about if someone thinks the Second Amendment is the right to own an assault rifle, it's like, what situation do you think you're going to be in where you're going to have a weapon that fires 40 rounds in the space of 12 seconds? You know,
right.
It's like, do you like if you're at the point where that's the weaponry you need,
you're
fucked.
You're absolutely fucked. Yeah. If only I had an assault rifle now, you know, fuck.
Like, we're talking about a situation where there's like 15 people in front of you and they all have guns and you need a weapon to mow them down, and it's
yeah.
I don't. You're right. Like, surely, if you have a gun for like self-defense, reasonably in America, you're talking about like one shooter, right?
Right.
Maybe a couple, like for like organized crime, I guess.
Yeah, if you're
maybe,
like a bank heist or something crazy.
Like your average guy in the street, if he had to defend himself against an attacker, you're talking about one person. You know, you don't need a fully automatic AK-47 assault
slung
rifle
over your back. You know,
to deal with that. You know, so you're right. I think. Because this is a dated law, this Second Amendment, it is so dated that it doesn't even apply to like these automatic weapons.
No,
because
exactly,
it wasn't designed for them. These things are even too much. You know, you can take out like you're talking about 15 people just dead. Seconds. You know.
Do you think when they were writing these laws back in the 1700s, if they could fathom what a machine gun was, what an actual assault rifle was, they would want the public to have those?
No,
there's no fucking
not.
way. Of course they wouldn't, like, because you just don't. It's a type of power you don't want to give to a random citizen that hasn't been vetted, and like you said, like no fucking mental health checks or criminal records and that type of thing. So, surely assault rifles. I think most reasonable people they have to agree that that's going to be on the line. The problem is that a lot of Americans they think that that's like properly infringing on their rights. But
so we're saying a hard no to assault rifles. What about semi-automatic pistols? You know, small gun,
like
eight bullets in the chamber. I don't know. I have no idea. Small pistol.
Yeah. Pew type of thing.
Fits in your jean pocket.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So only men can have them then.
Fits in your handbag. I never said that.
Nice one. That's the type of thing that I like. I think if I was an American, that's the type of gun I would want to buy, because that's the type of reasonable. That's the type of, you know, that fits the scenario of like if your home is being invaded, this gun will be able to fend off the invaders effectively. You know, that's the type of scenario that I think that fits. And like what we were saying earlier, like I imagine most Americans have a gun. And I imagine most of them are probably handguns, because they're like, if they have like a concealed carry permit. So I would want to at least match that level of force, I suppose. I don't know if that kind of defeats the point of trying to introduce like this reformation. But I think the handguns in America, realistically, that's what should be the main like selling point to the public. And for like anything bigger than that, maybe like for hunting or something like that in Britain, that's the reason you get guns here, and they're always like the shotguns. I don't know what the fuck they are. They look like a shotgun, and they're for hunting, and they're like quite heavy gauge type of guns. That's reasonable, because also we need to think about like handguns. They've got a relatively limited range, I think. I don't know. So it's the type of thing that I feel is potentially less dangerous to give to someone that's fucking.
I'm not sure it has
lunatic.
like. I think when you say range like that, it sounded like you meant like 40 meters. I think a handgun could probably. I mean, obviously it's the limitation of the shooter, but I think a handgun could probably travel a long way.
Oh, I think it'll travel like, yeah, it'll travel super far. But I'm speculating here now. I'm thinking about it, but I was always under the impression that a handgun was like past like 25 meters, very unreliable.
Oh, okay. Maybe like the sight and stuff like that. Maybe it's difficult to shoot a target.
Right,
like,
exactly. But a gun that you put on your shoulder, like that's naturally a lot more accurate, and that's potentially more dangerous. That's the type of gun that someone could hang out of a building and start firing into a crowd in America.
Okay.
That's the type of thing that is not necessary. So, what do you think about the idea of a handgun? Then does that seem? Would you just want to ban them altogether? Because like I think we've agreed that that's probably not realistic. Or
no, I mean it's definitely not realistic. But I'm more thinking in terms of where we should think it should happen in this day and age. Now, when I think about a reason that someone would want to own a handgun, I do think about self-defense. I think about if someone comes at them or an intruder in the house or something like that, and they pull out the gun to defend themselves. That's the situation that I think about when I think about a reason to have a gun. Now, if you think about an intruder in your house, right? A gun gives you like distance from that attacker. A gun is like, it's probably the only reliable way that I can think of to like put that person down at a reasonable distance. Because if you take away a gun from that scenario, you're now talking about like a melee weapon. You're talking about a baseball bat or a knife.
Yeah.
And that kind of close quarters combat that you would get into with an intruder seems like it would be very dangerous for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That seems like it'd be very bad for you to get into that scenario. So then I think, okay, maybe a gun is reasonable for self-defense in the household or in public or whatever. If someone comes at you, you shoot them. But if you introduce the right for you to own a gun, your attacker may also have a gun.
Right, exactly.
If everyone's free to own a gun, then the people that are attacking you could have a gun as well. And it's like, so you've now introduced a scenario where you're at distance and they're at distance, and it's like
you've just escalated the force, haven't you?
Exactly. It's kind of like a quick draw scenario. So it's like that situation also seems like it might be very dangerous for you. And I think it would be interesting to see the statistics on if one person has a gun or if two people have a gun. There's probably likely to be serious injuries or fatalities in that scenario. Whereas if you got into a kerfuffle with like melee weapons, the extent of injury there is probably much less. However, you have much less capability of defending yourself in your own home if a big dude comes in.
Yeah, I think also if like we're talking about this close range scenario, that's the type of scenario in which your weapon can oftentimes get turned against you, and like you can, like you said, you can often do like lots of unintentional harm to yourself and that other person just because of like the frantic nature of melee. Whereas with a gun, it's this ideal perfect scenario. If you are defending yourself against an aggressor that is not stopping force, and you said to them, "Stop you, or I'm going to fucking shoot you," and you can shoot them at a distance, and then you've taken care of like this person that was going to do you harm. You've protected your property, so it was legal, and it's done it at a distance. That's the perfect scenario for guns. But you're right. As soon as that other person has a gun, you're just almost like you're making the odds worse for both of you. You're making it more dangerous for the home invader who's actually trying to break in and steal something, and you're making it much more dangerous for that person trying to defend themselves. So it's one of those.
I don't think I'm not in this situation. I'm never worried about making it more dangerous for the home invader because person has like broken rights. You know what I mean?
Sure,
I'm never concerned about them. I'm not saying you were, but in this situation, I would never be concerned about that.
No, I agree with you, but I'm just saying in terms of like human life and the dangers to the whole scenario, you're making it you're stacking the odds against both of you in that scenario.
Yeah, I think one of the arguments I would say for guns as well is the fact that if you both have a gun, is it, and this seems like a really oversimplification, but it's like more of a fair playing field for, like, if you talk about getting into a melee scuffle with someone that intrudes on your home, there are like physical advantages to doing that. Like, especially if you're like a woman in your house and a man intrudes, you know, that chances are he's going to be much more powerful than you are and can't overpower you easily. If you have a gun, that it almost levels out what can happen there. You know, if you camp up in your bedroom with a gun, someone comes in, you shoot at the door, as soon as it opens, you know, that's...
You're going to be fine. It doesn't matter if you're like really weak or smaller or woman or whatever. Yeah, I think isn't it called like being a force multiplier? It's like any type of weapon, like a knife is a force multiplier. And so if you've got a fight between like a small guy and a big guy, the chances are the big guy's going to win. If you give them both knives, there's the chances become much more even. If you give them both guns, then it's a complete toss up. You know, like you're getting rid of any concept of like fighting ability or natural strength or innate, you know, skill. You're just giving them both guns. I think actually, it's kind of random, but like I remember like during like the medieval times, like a lot of rulers objected to like bows and like I think they objected to crossbows because the idea was that it took all the skill out of combat and it was like not honourable because like you're not proving yourself in combat in any way. And yeah, as an aside, but that is exactly what a gun does. And you're right. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's because like for people that are more vulnerable, sure, you can give them a gun and they can protect themselves, but you're just sprinkling lethality over the whole situation, you know.
But I think we've now like found the line. We've found the line of where we think we're drawing the line. It's somewhere between a small firearm and no firearm at all.
Right.
That's where the line is. And when I think about regulation for that, I think about specifically mental health background checks. So someone going through a sort of mental health loophole to get through to make sure that you're in a state to own this gun, to make sure you won't do yourself or anyone else any harm, and to make sure that you're not like a known criminal. You know, I think that's obviously a simplification of the way I think it should be regulated. But off the top of my head, that's what I'm thinking. You know.
Well, yeah. I think that what you're describing there it's been like the view of the anti-gun people in America for a long time now, and it's like it does make sense. Like it just takes a little bit of conversation to realize that there has to be some degree of oversight in this process. You know, we cannot let it be completely open, and for God's sake, it almost is ridiculous arguing the points because we're talking about criminals and people with mental health issues giving them firearms. It's like there should not need to be an argument really, but there is, and there are people that argue against it vehemently. So it's what do you do? And I guess if we were to do this and change these laws and make it a little bit harder for people to own guns, you'd like to think maybe there'd be a kind of a cultural maybe awareness of the fact that they're buying a gun and this is a little bit serious and not to be fucked around with, and that would just maybe educate the public about gun safety a little bit more, and maybe just that these are the slow things that years and years from now would lead to better practice and understanding with guns, and eventually more regulations would get put in place, and you know eventually the government starts buying fucking assault rifles. But it has to be a really long process because like exactly like you said, there's 1.2 guns for every American right now, and they're not going anywhere. So it needs to be a really slow process they need to introduce.
Yeah, and it almost seems like if you sat down with any reasonable person, that how could they come to any other conclusion than this? You know,
Right.
Like we're swaying in between. You know, maybe people should own guns, maybe we shouldn't have any guns at all. That's the kind of like we've come to that conclusion, and it's difficult to see any reasonable person coming to any other conclusion, you know, because
yeah,
it seems like all the things we've talked about are perfectly reasonable, and the only real issue we're thinking about now is the fact that people that are criminals and have mental health issues have ready access to firearms, you know, because there are so many mass shootings that it seems so obvious that America has a problem with people that have mental health issues being able to get assault weaponry, you know.
Yeah. I think that the people that make the noise about guns and like having their guns taken away, they are very much like the extreme Republican right. They're the ones that like they value individual freedom above all other virtues, you know, and the very idea of the government infringing upon their ability to own a firearm, you know, a object, they find that just so abhorrent. This idea that the government would stop them doing something, and I think it is like this, another example of like these people that have reached the very, very extreme of a certain viewpoint, and they're so past it at this stage that they have no idea about the reality of the actual situation they're dealing with here. They're just arguing because I don't know, but and it's been going on for so long now that it seems unlikely to swing back the other way. And you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It's been like, you know, 2.5 centuries of this, and it seems like the problem hasn't evolved in any way, shape or form. Like, the country hasn't come to any sort of conclusion that this law is like dated and maybe we should update it, because these people do claim the Second Amendment for like the right to own their guns, and you know, I feel like someone just has to say to them, what do you honestly think that your automatic weapon is going to do if the US government decides that you are now under their control? Like, what? Like, you've got a couple of guns in your house. The government won't even send troops. You'll just be dead. You know, the powers that they have now, the military powers, have gone so far off the deep end that it's like your gun is nothing in this scenario.
Exactly.
And you're not getting a missile or a nuke. You know, you can't have these things.
Yeah, we can't give you that, you know. Fucking like nerve gas. You're just not getting these things. These are things that we use against you, though.
So it's almost like they're claiming the Second Amendment, but without even realising it, the Second Amendment isn't even in place anymore, because the Second Amendment says, because the technology at the time was guns, the Second Amendment says you can have guns because the government has guns. America doesn't even apply the Second Amendment anymore, because the weaponry has become more advanced and people don't have access to that weaponry. So the Second Amendment in reality doesn't actually exist anymore. People just think it does.
So that's what I don't get then. Why is there this perpetual stalemate that's been going on for centuries? Why are we still here? Like, why? I don't like. My excuse was that there must be an extreme group of like hard right Republicans that are arguing against this, but it has to be more than that, man. You know, like there can't be this small fringe group that are arguing for something so loudly that the government's like, yeah, maybe they're right. They're like, this is something deeper than that. I think this is the type of thing where you start talking about like government lobbying territory. You know, there has to be a reason larger than the public opinion. It's because like, think about the amount of deaths that happen. Like, these deaths cost America. It's not like, oh, we've lost another citizen, hey ho. It's like that would have been 40 years worth of taxes that America would have made. It's really bad for them that their people are actively dying in the streets. You know, this is something they would want to address, but they don't address it for some reason. So there has to be something, a huge driving force that's continuing the stalemate, because it's in their interest.
I think first of all, there must be a crazy amount of money in this industry that must be somehow filtering to the government. You know, there must be some sort of monetary gain that the government is seeing. You know, maybe the NRA or someone's funding this in some way, shape or form so that they don't do anything about it. Second of all, I don't think that the people that think they should own guns is like a small fringe group. I think one of the statistics that I seen was that I think it was like half of Americans that were polled thought they should have the right to own a gun. So I don't think this group of people is like an insignificant minority. They have like serious voting power, and they will vote for people that want to keep their gun rights.
But we're not. You and I aren't talking about getting rid of every gun. We're saying get rid of assault rifles. You know, that cannot be. Surely most people in America can at least agree assault rifles, they cross this line, this hypothetical line we're talking about. That's what I'm saying. Like that's something that's so obvious that it seems hard to that's not the case.
I think they're getting caught up on the exact wording of the Second Amendment, and instead of the principle that it applies to, they just see you have the right to bear arms, and automatic weapons are, in their view, in their definition of it, they are arms. So they're like, we have the right to do this.
But it's so bizarre. It's because, like, sure, it's a law. Like, do these Americans not realize that laws change every day because they become outdated? Like, it's the Second Amendment. That wasn't the first law. That changed. You know, that was amended
No,
from
no,
an
no, no,
initial.
no, no. I think the amendments are like. I don't think the Second Amendment was like a second iteration of something. I think the amendments are like the rules that they said when they founded America.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Okay, I didn't appreciate that. But regardless, laws change every single day.
Yep.
Hundreds of them change every single year. Most of the time they change because the government has finally realised that the laws that were in place do not apply to the current environment we find ourselves in. Why is that one law that's 240 years old that obviously does no longer apply? Why has that been left behind?
I don't think it's just that law. I think it might actually be all the amendments. I think that
Really?
we spoke about Pride in a few episodes ago, and I think that the fact that they rose up against people that they saw suppressing them, they rose up against them and they made their own laws, and these are the laws that are now in place and are part of their constitution now. That's a point of extreme pride for Americans. So to turn around and say that these laws should be changed, to them is like an attack on what it means to be American. It's like a freedom thing. And I think
That's
stupid, it's just
man.
it's a them not wanting to admit that these laws are dated now, and it's not. I don't think it's like un-American to like change them, because America, surely the country isn't about what's written down on like pieces of paper. Like the country
No.
is like so much more than that.
No,
It's about the freedom, but freedom also means the ability to like change
to
the rules that
change
govern
your
you.
mind. Exactly. Like the America itself was founded by changing through revolution, by changing what existed because they thought it didn't fit the current scenario. And now we're in this this completely like topsy-turvy world where there's now like certain laws that are 300 years old that are sacred and sanctimonious. Like that. Honestly, man, that's stupid. Absolutely fucking stupid that people argue
it's
that.
irony. It's irony at the highest level, because it's almost like they're saying, "What's America about? America's about freedom." Okay, well, should we do this? And it's like, no, we have very strict rules on what you can and can't do.
Yeah. And we decided them, 2 centuries ago.
Yeah, 2.5 centuries ago, we wrote those down, and they'll never change now. And it's like baffling. That's just it's almost mental.
I don't understand it. I don't. So I suppose like what we're kind of saying here is what I kind of thought the conclusion would reach, which was in America there's not much you can do because it's so systemic, but you would have thought at least some small degree of legislation to hamper people's access to guns and limit their ability to reach, really destructive firearms is very, very fucking reasonable. But once again, I'm sitting here and I'm just like so flabbergasted that it's not the case. I will never understand. I really don't understand it even now that we've discussed it.
I think that this is a topic for another day, perhaps. But the conclusion that we've come to in this scenario and how systemic America actually is has given me something to think about when it comes to racism, when it comes to sexism.
Really?
We've now just seen how difficult it is for America to change these things. These laws have been in place for 2.5 centuries. How difficult must it have been to change something like slavery in America?
Yeah, right.
There must be a lot of people that still are systemically racist in America. These people just don't want to change. They're like, these are the country's values. When America was founded, we had slaves. And they've had to like change that. That must be a real sore point for people, and a real negative point about their country. They're so proud of this country that's so free and so can do whatever you want, but also adheres to a very strict set of rules that can't be altered in any way, shape, or form. It's like that's confliction in the country itself. It's the definition of irony.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I suppose like it does seem that a lot of people are using this like archaic law that they don't really understand too much to force their views on gun control. And I suppose it makes perfect sense that if people actually are doing that, if they actually are looking at this law and logically thinking that should apply today, then it would not surprise me at all if they're looking at all these other ancient I say ancient, very old practices or cultures that have been continued in America up until now, and they'd want to keep it that way just because that's what they think it's American. Like they don't. The definition of what it means to be American or what an American thing is so warped. It seems to me totally and utterly warped compared to what the values I associate with America. Like, you're right, fucking freedom. It's not like Scotland in that way. It's like freedom and self-rights and like making it on your own. But then like they're like hanging on to these old concepts to do with like guns and slavery. It's like, what? That's perplexing, isn't it?
It does give me a deeper appreciation for the systemic problems that are probably going on there, for sure. It's almost like this country's about freedom, but the way that I think freedom should be.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Not
or the
way,
way that
not the way
thought.
that you think freedom should be. The way that the founding fathers they defined freedom. Don't you know that?
Like, yeah. Human intelligence peaked at them, and we're going downhill. Like, they knew what they were talking about.
It almost seems like America sort of has to adapt. It has to start learning, and it has to start changing these things. Otherwise, it's going to eat itself, and not a long space of time. And then China's going to take over, and then everyone's fucked when they
that'll be the end of us,
because they truly will take over, and they're all in cages,
Americans will still be arguing over if they want their fucking assault rifles. Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Actually, you told me before this conversation that you were going to be talking about guns, and I was like, I was worried that it was going to be a really short conversation because we were going to reach those same conclusions really quickly. But you're right, it's given me a much bigger appreciation of why they're like that, and the degree of systemic thought that seems to persuade like their laws, and their people as a whole. Wow, I really would. I know no one's going to get to this stage in the video, but if there were Americans that were reviewing this, I would love to hear an American's opinion on their gun laws. Because like we're very much giving an outsider's view. And like we look at guns in a completely different way just because we've never experienced them and never interacted with them. I would love to know. I'd love to hear like the native side of the story, I suppose.
And that has been episode 9 of Guide to the 21st Century. If you are an American and you are listening, please comment on the video. If you are Adolf Hitler, please do not comment. I cannot be bothered removing your comment again. Although it did give me a bit of content, so I don't know.
but you're not getting a shout out next week, so fucking try it.
Yeah, maybe they'll say something else, and that was point to another conversation, because that was probably one of the most interesting conversations I think we've had. Since
More prompts, please.
Since we started the podcast, to be honest. So yeah, if any Americans are listening, or anyone else for that matter, please leave a comment on either this topic or the one before. We'd love to hear your opinions.
Okay. We'll talk to you next week.
Right, thanks for listening, guys.